Hello, welcome, or welcome back to the Instech podcast. Zoya, podcast producer here. This week, we're diving into the world of broker management and the changing landscape of commercial insurance. Recorder is a company redefining how brokers collect, process, and share risk data. Joining Robin Merttens is Alex Cardona, CEO and co-founder of Recorder. After building and exiting Codat, a financial data infrastructure company, Alex turned his focus to insurance, tackling the inefficiencies that slow down brokers and underwriters alike. In this episode, we're getting into the details: how Recorder is streamlining workflows, why API-driven distribution is the future, and what it really takes to build a scalable tech solution in the insurance space. If you're in the industry, work with brokers, or just want to hear how better data management can drive smarter underwriting, this one's for you. Now let's get into it.
It's Sunday and it's Instech podcast time. Thank you for tuning in to this week's podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Alex Cardona, who's the CEO and co-founder of Recorder. A very warm Instech welcome to you, Alex.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, on your website, it says about Recorder, it says you are modern broker management software for the next generation of commercial insurance brokers. So that could be quite a lot of things. And in the course of the next half an hour, I'm going to explore with you exactly what it is. But I'd like to start, with the whole story. What was the genesis of the company?
Yeah, thanks. You're right. It could be a lot of things. I think we're still figuring out precisely what the extent of that really looks like. I guess we had a previous business, a company called Codat, which was a universal API for small business financial data, basically building better data pipelines for banks and other lenders to small businesses to get data from their small businesses, customers, internal systems. And we had built that business over the last sort of 10 years and basically got a bit big and a bit boring. We cashed out of it in the end of 2023 to JP Morgan. And we had some insurance customers at that business, right, for exactly the same use case, pulling data to make better underwriting decisions. Should be exactly the same value proposition, data pipelines, all of it. But the actual number of small businesses who were prepared to share data with their insurers was a tiny fraction of everything we saw in banking or credit world. HSBC would go live with us and link 10,000 businesses in the first 6 months, and Aviva or whoever it was would go live and link 30 businesses in the first 6 months. That was very odd to us. Why is it not working better in the insurance world? And the conclusion that we came to was basically that when you get from the small business to the broker, it's a very manual data collection journey. And there's no real way for that information to then flow onto the underwriter actually at the insurer. And that seemed rubbish, frankly, in the 2020s. So we said we can do something better than that, and that's what we're building.
How long ago did you set up Recorder?
Ooh, less than a year ago now.
So you, Matt and Dave got together, you had the past experience at Codat, you could see there's a problem. Yeah, what next?
First thing, obviously, go and talk to a whole load of brokers. We spent a lot of time during gardening leave going and sitting behind brokers' shoulders and seeing what their daily workflows actually look like. And that was a really enlightening process. There's so much of everyone's time is spent manually rekeying information, just taking data out of some PDF, writing down notes after a meeting with just the core information on a small business, typically, which then just needs to be uploaded either to the broker's internal system of record or to an insurer's system. And that just doesn't need to exist in today's world. So you start to think, how do we break that down? What does this problem really look like? Okay, we need to collect information from a small business, and we need to find a way to store it, and then we need to find a way to send it on to an insurer.
You define the problem, then you got to build something. Did you sit down and write a huge set of specifications and go and knock up your old Codat developers. How do you set about building the tech?
The key thing in today's world is always just ship something. I don't think about designing something that's going to read the world. Have some basic principles that inform the core of what you want to build, and then just start building something that produces value for someone. Just take something where you've seen the most acute pain point. In our case, was collecting cybersecurity data for cyber insurance. Statements of fact, basically, and find a way to get the customers, brokers, to send a link to their underlying customers, and then they just start filling it in. You have all that information in front of you, and when you get on the phone as the broker, you can have that conversation about what the gaps are in that information right at the start of the conversation, as opposed to like 45 minutes in, which is what we saw a lot of people doing, and that was a big hit. From there, you start unpacking all the next set of boring problems of what to do with that data.
So you're 12 months in, if I break down what you've got to build, and I don't trivialize the challenge you set for yourself, you've got to build some kit which collects in a reusable format all the information about a risk and about a client that the broker has, that then has to find its way to an underwriter, to a carrier. So I'm trying to break that down. There must be a bit that sits at the broker end, and there's got to be a bit that sits at the carrier end, and they've got to talk to each other. I've got a map of it in my head, but I'm not explaining it very well. But is that sort of what it is?
Yeah, basically. So the piece that matters to the broker most of all is actually triaging that business as an opportunity for them, right? How much is this business realistically going to be spending on in premium over the next year? And that's the one thing I need to know, because then I know how many humans to put on it, what type of humans to put on it, how much effort to really expend. Then I need to think about what broad buckets of risk do they have within that business. And then I need to start thinking, what are the pieces of additional information that the underwriter is going to be asking for me to be able to go off and get them the best possible cover I can get? And that is actually a piece that's really well informed by data. The more of this that you collect in a standardized format, the more quickly you can triage every single new opportunity coming in. The brilliant thing about today's world is also that you can get a whole load of this stuff, i.e. the data on a small business, from publicly available sources. If I'm given the name of an individual business, there's a bunch of underlying data vendors available who will be able to provide me that set instantly, and I can give you a very good indication of how big that business is in terms of turnover, what their employee count looks like, the types of business that they're actually doing, what the material risks of those business lines would look like, and therefore I can have, probably within a pretty good confidence score, a sense of what that opportunity really looks like to me as a broker before even having to speak to them.
I really like that. I'm being a bit naughty now, but you basically provided them with what I call a CWBA score, which is a can we be asked score, which actually I think I'd like that tech in many different walks of life. Like, how much effort should I be putting into this? I like that. What do you provide to the underwriters, to the carriers?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting area of development, because there are some insurers who are underwriting individual lines in really advanced ways, where they have really sophisticated data pipelines, and they know exactly the pieces of information that they're looking for. And the goal for them really is to reduce the number of questions that they're asking a broker, so that they can get to exactly that same BA score on an individual business and price that risk, so that all the business can get turned around as cheaply and as effectively as possible. Or you can have right at the opposite end, where it's a really esoteric risk, and what they're looking for is an incredibly broad sense of what this business feels like. Business that does saturation divers underneath the North Sea, right? That's the type of business where you really want to have a sense of what it looks like, and the data points out there for how precisely they do that. It's really hard to understand how you should be pricing them. So being able to accommodate all of those is where this gets really interesting. We've decided to start at the the former end, where people have really sophisticated data pipelines, because there we can prove the point that we're aiming to show everyone, which is when you give people good ways of getting data, it doesn't really matter how complicated the data is. You've built the pipeline, all you need to do is add additional pieces of fuel into it. That ends to the same point, which is improving underwriting outcomes, both in terms of efficiency, but also in terms of quality of data.
If I think about that, and I have some experience of this from my own background, that feels like what I call a traction play. In other words, your success is to an extent driven off the levels of liquidity. So if you're a carrier, and by plugging into you in the way that you described, you can get lots and lots of broker business in a very efficient format. Why wouldn't you? And the work that you need to do at the start, though, is creating a kind of liquid marketplace in which you've got enough brokers on it to be able to get the carriers interested and enough carriers on it to be able to get the brokers interested. Is that what the last 12 months has been about?
100%. Yeah, it's a chicken and egg problem, and really believe that the brokers are the people who drive the change in this market more so than the insurers. The insurers can put a better product out there in terms of the ways in which brokers can deal with it, but that isn't really going to move the needle unless there's some outcome for the underlying businesses, which is really where the brokers can leverage their power to explain to those businesses, this is a sensible way in which to do it. And let me just show you how much less painful it is to deal with me than the other guys down the road. Yeah, we've spent the last, whatever it is, 9 months or so, signing up brokers across quite a broad spectrum of UK commercial to say, hey, let's first look at automating your data ingestion from your customers, replacing the contact us form on your website with a recorder powered set of data ingestion tools, and then automating their internal workflows to produce the outputs that you'd like to show to underwriters, whether that's a market presentation with all of the data pre-populated or firing along API data pipelines for instant quote and bind.
So come on, give the listeners a little bit of a better understanding of the reaction. You talk to me in, sounds presumptuous, but I've been preaching this gospel for a long time now, and you talk about the theory of it, and you think to yourself, this is a complete no-brainer. Why doesn't everybody just leap on it? But that's never the reality. Has the industry been broadly supportive?
Yeah,
Now, you
I
don't.
mean,
That was a yeah. That was a yeah. Go on. There's something that lies behind that.
yeah, we've gone quite a bit faster than we originally anticipated, to be honest, which is great. We anticipated quite a lot of, let's face it, cultural resistance to this point of this is a no-brainer. Why hasn't it happened already? Because people actually just operate in the ways that they expect to work. That's how they've been doing it for the last 40 years. And that's just how the world exists. But the areas that we weren't perhaps expecting to do so well in were the areas where this has been the most acute problem. So PI brokers is probably the number one, where data ingestion is unbelievably hard and painful for, I don't know, someone collecting work splits on surveyors on all the different types of work that they do. Actually, it can take the FD probably to collect all the different types of data reformatted into whatever requirement that the particular broker needs. Stripping that out has really been transformative for quite a lot of the brokers we've been dealing with, and therefore what we've seen is adoption has really run very quickly in those segments. And the other area where we've probably gone faster than we anticipated has actually been in carrier uptake. The key piece is really basically people who had built APIs to offer their products out to the market, and they had suffered from the same chicken and egg problem. We've put all this money into building an API, but no one's connected to it yet. Then we turned up and said, hey, please give us the API documents. We'll turn around an integration and start giving you brokers to quote against them within a couple of weeks. And that's just been a breath of fresh air, I think, frankly, to some insurers.
This is why Actuaries has been so successful, isn't it? Having built up the kind of infrastructure, it's got lots of brokers at one end and lots of carriers at the other. I think there are plenty of people out there who would like alternatives to actuaries, certainly something brand new and flexible and relatively cheap to implement. So I can see why the industry would be very supportive. But I guess it'll only be supported for a while, right? They'll give you strong support for as long as they think that you can make a difference and compete and move into that space. And then thereafter, well, you're suffering the same. You're suffering the same issues as many people face when they're building businesses like this.
Yeah, and I think that this is a really tricky area about building like financial data infrastructure networks, right? To what extent do you dictate the ways in which people get to operate over the network? Actually, you can dramatically accelerate adoption all over the marketplace by saying, no, this is the way we're going to operate. This is exactly the types of data that should be flowing through us. We're not going to allow everyone to do their own type of thing everywhere. And that can just streamline decision making so much, because it's like, this is the type of business we want to write. This is exactly the data that we need to see in order to be able to do that. Just play according to these rules. And that's great for a specific set. But in order to really change the way in which industries operate, you have to allow people to come up with interesting ideas of, these are the types of business we'd like to write and this is how. The magic of an API fundamentally is that it has a flexible data structure where you can ask for an additional set of data and we can dynamically serve up that request to someone on the other side. And then it becomes a simple trading choice. Who do you want to send your business to for them to quote against it, or vice versa?
This is a big project, and it's got massive complexities. And I look at that tech you have to build, and I'm already marvel at the kind of levels of engineering in it. There must be things that you learned from your Codat experience that have been brought to bear here that have stood you in good stead. Have you anything that you could share with us?
Absolutely. So Codat was a really interesting story in that we were building something that was fundamentally new infrastructure, which required a really large technical build. We had about 200 engineers on the product. And the difficulty with that is about being able to execute at really aggressive speed, while being able to prove that you can deal with massive load on the system and a ton of different odd ways in which people wanted to use you. We were operating global business from day one, that we had to deal with people with Chinese balance sheets, which, needless to say, work in a very different way to a UK balance sheet. And being able to standardize that and produce that in an underwriting model, and then being able to do it when suddenly they add another, the 50,000 businesses in the next quarter. The key piece is get the infrastructure, the technical infrastructure for the back end baked in really hard from day one. We spend a lot of time in probably the first 3 months not producing a ton of sexy front end experiences, but rather building out our infrastructure so we'd be enterprise ready as soon as anyone really wanted to turn us on and start putting volume through. And then you can start to look at all the interesting opportunities, and this is where it gets really exciting. Maybe it's a trite thing to say, but listen to the customers. Customers are really good at telling you their problems in half a sentence at the end of the meeting. Oh, this is all great, but actually PI is not the one for us. A particular type of property has got a really messy data component that we really need help with. That's the sort of piece where, because you've got that infrastructure ready to go, you can suddenly jump on it and say, hey, this is a completely untouched segment of the market. We can streamline here. And being really receptive to that, which is basically about having really quick feedback loops between people who are talking directly to the customers in terms of implementation or sales, and then engineers actually building stuff on the back end, is where you get really good. We are by no means perfect, but we've been brought into the areas of the insurance market we wouldn't have expected to be in at all, simply by listening to the customers, and it's worked incredibly well.
That's why when you go and see your doctor, they deal with everything. And then right at the end, just before you're about to leave, they'll always say, Is there anything else? Okay, so you talk about infrastructure, usability, APIs, and then I think to myself, all this is going to cost a lot of money. How are you funding it?
We're going to fund the business entirely ourselves, having exited the previous one very well. That seemed like the sensible thing to do. But then some of the early investors in the old business said, oh, if you guys are going to go off and do something really boring B2B and data infrastructure again, we should probably give you some of the money back. So we said, it's sort of easier to play with their money rather than ours. So we took a bunch of cash off them early last year. But really, this is not one of those businesses that requires huge venture, let's throw tons of money at it, right? The last business certainly was. We raised about $170 million all in over the time, and just doesn't seem like it's required here. We are providing a surprising amount of value, frankly, in quite early on in the journey, and therefore it's quite easy to say to people, hey, there's a ton of value here. We can almost quantify exactly how much value we're providing. Really, the thing that gets us going faster and able to build more is just clients signing up to use us. We don't plan on raising a ton of money really to do it. It's just about execution.
Oh, how times are changing. Back to the glory days of InsurTech, when everyone had the slightest idea, they were rushing around, putting a massive valuation on it before they cut a line of code, getting people to part with the money. Here you are with a well thought out proposition. Second time entrepreneurs, highly backable, and then you don't want any money. This is the world's turned upside down.
Yeah, it's an interesting market process, and I think a large chunk of it is actually just tech cycles, right? At the moment, the pressure is much more on the sales go-to-market side within tech versus the kind of infrastructure costs of building SaaS tooling now, and that will flip back as we go into the next generation of tech. Who knows what will be in the next 10 years, which will be much more capital intensive, I'm certain, in order to build. And then it will be like who's got the biggest balance sheet and who can then throw the most money at it. But it's just not one of those moments, which is good in some ways, bad in others. Depends what your core skill set is, I guess.
You've just joined Instech. We were delighted to have you. There'll be lots of people who listen to this podcast. There are lots of ways which we'd like to help you. Are you looking for partners in terms of implementation, or partners who can just generally help accelerate growth in some way?
Absolutely. As data infrastructure, you're only as good as the people you're plugging into. And at the front end, that is people who can provide interesting sources of data that allow us to help brokers get a better understanding of their customer before they pick up the phone to them. That is internally within brokers, people who help with implementation to actually move how people operate their workflows on a daily basis, and the existing software providers to the brokers. And then on the insurer side, the industry, whether people acknowledge it or not, is in a wild dash towards API-based distribution. And the insurers who want to win in 10 years' time will be the people who have produced APIs. And a lot of people doing really good work on this front. But anyone who is building any way for an insurance product to be expressed as an API for UK commercial today, we'd love to talk to them.
Thank you very much. That's a good list. We'll make sure that message is suitably broadcast. And regular listeners will know that we normally end up the podcast with the same question, which I put to you too, which is, for those who are still listening, 25 minutes in, what would be your final message? If you leave them with one thing that they can remember from this podcast, what would you like it to be?
I think basically that traditional e-trading within UK commercial insurance is dead. Probably is going to expand at double-digit rates for the next 15 years. But if you want to build the product that's going to win market share off other people, you've got to be moving to API.
Yeah. Alex, it's been a pleasure. It really has. We have sought you out because we're a business we at Instech think the industry needs. I'm sure there are a lot of people listening to this who agree with that, and who simultaneously go, rather them than me. But you've given yourself a big a big challenge there, but there are a lot of people out there wishing you luck. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. And let's come back in a year or two's time and we'll get a progress report from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robin. Really appreciate it.
Well, if you've made it this far, then I'm pretty sure you found that as interesting as I did. If you haven't already heard, Exponential Risk London is a new 2-day conference hosted by Instech, dedicated to addressing the evolving needs of the global catastrophe and climate modelling community. Tickets are now on sale, and hopefully we'll see you in March. That's all from us this week. Goodbye.